Thank you, everyone. So we're going to move to our next session, Museum and Families for Change, Sharing of Experience. So we have now three panelists who will talk about the importance of the role of museum in building lasting peace, like made an example of the Museum of Frideri, and building positive social change by engaging the new generation and families. So we will start with Arianna Spigolon from the Compagnia di San Paolo. Arianna.
Thank you. Hello. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, and it was very stimulating to follow every interventions that preceded me. So thank you to give input and to everyone. I'm Arianna Spigolon, and I work in the cultural department of Compagnia di San Paolo. That is a philanthropic foundation that operates for the durable and sustainable development of the northwest of Italy. We are organized in three macro areas: culture, planet, and people, persone. About cultural department, our aim is to ensure that culture can increasingly recognized as an indispensable resource for the development, for the achievement of the 17 sustainable goals of 2030 agenda of UN, and for the development of society, but also for the growth and the well-being of individuals. And this is especially important if we speak about children, when children start to exploring the world, creating their first relationships, and to imagining their role into the community. First of all, within their families. In 2018, the World Health Organization published a framework, a document that is a framework that highlights the importance of integration of services for families and a holistic approach for the health of children and the well-being of families. In this document, we read that invest in early childhood development is one of the best ways a country can boost shared prosperity, promote inclusive economic growth, expand equitable opportunity, and end extreme poverty. So it's a very important document for us. And we have scientific evidence about the positive impact of cultural experience in the growth and in the well-being of children and of their families. An example is a research that has been conducted in Piedmont, recently has been conducted, about Born to Read, a project that is growing in Piedmont, but in all the world. And we have seen in this research, we have demonstrated that shared reading in families during the first years of life of a child can have a positive impact also during the primary school years, about a greater interest for reading, for frequentation of library with the parents, a reduction about the using of screens and smartphones, and also the reduction of the language gap between children that come from migrant families and children that are Italian native speakers. So a good, very important result for us. So for these reasons, we aspire to make the cultural experience a pleasure and a habit for every family, beyond the cultural, social, economic barriers. And we aspire to include cultural experience in the integrated service system for families. This is very important. And to direct policies towards cultural welfare. How do we do it? We support projects that are submitted by external organizations, projects that want to facilitate the approach of families to the cultural experience through construction of networks made by different subjects that belong to different sectors: cultural, educational, social, healthcare. So a very big community and different community composed by different subjects. So through investment in the development of skills, professional skills, but also parenting skills that are very important, and through the use of an informal approach for institutional spaces, but also to choose informal spaces to offer cultural experience for families. Here you have some examples about projects that we have supported, and you find an evolution of Lilliput, that is Gulliver, and other projects that is Born to Read and other. But we also start up and manage new projects. And I would like to share with you one project that is Famiglie 06, Family 06. That is a project that we have managed to stimulate 5 museums, 5 cultural organizations, and 5 social organizations that usually take care of families, that we call the Poli 06, to work together, to find common goals, and to collaborate, to co-design, to reach every families that are far from the cultural experience. In which way social organizations, social mediators accompany families towards the cultural experience. And museum had to welcome them, respecting their informal approach. And every organization use a kit that we have made with the help of Lilliput. So we have another Lilliput kit that is different from yours, but is also a Lilliput kit that is composed by simple objects, but objects that help families to have a playful experience, a playful, a light, an interesting experience, active experience, and to make them comfortable into the museum and with the cultural experience. Here you have some pictures. You have some of the most important museums that we have in Turin. Here you have the Palace of Reggia di Venaria, the Exhibition Museum, and a museum about modern art. And you see our families that are using the kit, the Lilliput kit, to explore in their way the museum. The kit I have here, this is the kit, sorry. This is the kit. You see a bag, but a bag that can be transformed in a carpet that children can use it. And inside you have many objects. Perhaps I don't have the time to show everything, but I show my favorite object, if I find it. Yes. this one that is composed by some lenses, colored lenses that can be used by children to explore the world, to transform the world, and to give a new color for whatever they see. So it's a good experience to create other world area things. And this project, Famiglie Genocide, but also every project that we support, stimulated us to develop a new strategy that is characterized by a new call for proposals, that is cultura per crescere, culture to grow. This call wants to disseminate good practices, yes, wants to promote cultural welfare policies and practices, cultural welfare developed by networks that are composed by public organizations, educational institutions, cultural organizations, social organizations, health services, a different community that have to collaborate to build cultural welfare policies and practices. And we want to promote the progressive penetration of shared cultural experiences into the habits of families, beyond differences, beyond barriers. So for us, and with this call and with the other projects, it's very important to join, to reach every family. First of all, vulnerable families, because you know, a family that has the habit to come to visit a museum is a good experience always. But it's very difficult to reach vulnerable families and families that are far from cultural experience. So this is our aim, and we work to create policies, a context policies, but also experiences, practices to reach these families first of all. And we want to invest on the skills, professional and parenting skills. So we are at the beginning, because this call has been launched in July. So I don't have results to show you, but I have many open questions. And I think that open questions is a good sharing. Open questions is a good way to reflect, to share everything, and also to learn about your experiences. So open questions about networks and about families. Will cross-cutting alliances work? Will they be stable? Can different organizations have common goals and recognize each other, their role and their value in a different community? And about families, is it really possible to reach every family and to change their habits? That is our principal aim. And it is possible with this project to create mutuality between families. And also, so we work with vulnerable families. So you've seen with the Famiglie Genocide, we have decided to accompany families to cultural experience. And we hope that at the end of this project, families could be emancipated from the presence of social mediators that now work with them, and this is another challenge for us. So many open questions, no results, nothing now, but we hope that in 2 years, that is the time for these call proposals, we can read, we can observe some results, and we hope that these this project can bring us towards a cultural experiences that is increasingly inside integrated service system for families, and culture will be a resource for cultural welfare policies. They are the base, they are fundamental to create a system that is not based only a timetable, a rigid timetable, but can observe and can go on just to the future. Thank you. Sorry, I have to leave because I have a meeting, but I return. So for everything, I return here.
Thank you very much, Arianna, for this great presentation. We'll see you later. So, without delay, I will give the floor to our second speaker because we want to keep time for questions and answers at the end of the session. So I'm very pleased to give the floor to Mirian Bllaci from the Cultural Heritage Without Borders, one of our European Sites of Conscience members in Albania.
Hi everyone! How are you doing? How are you feeling? I thought so, but I prefer to ask anyways. Yeah. Before I start, I would like to ask you two things. The first thing is that you will allow me to show you only pictures. Do we agree on that? Yes. Okay. And the second thing, I would like us all to applaud to the people on the back, to the interpreters and all the technical stuff that is helping throughout the day. I will speak as slow as I can, but I'm a fast talker usually. So, yeah, I invite you all to take a journey to a place which is located more or less 1,000 kilometers from here. So we take the boat here at the lovely port of Genova, and we sail towards east. We go to the Adriatic Sea, and we go to Albania. And we are going there to discuss about some practical tools we have developed when it comes to engaging with kids and indirectly, let's say, with parents and with teachers about questions related to cultural heritage. Our starting point, and it's always good to state from the very beginning our background, where we come from in a way, is that we are an organization called Cultural Heritage Without Borders, Albania, and we work with heritage as a resource for peace building, for social, economic, and human development. So we try to utilize heritage as a resource in all possible fields. This being said, we are no educationalists, but we have a lot of practice, experience coming from the practice in different types of contexts, especially in contexts that come from, let's say, the background of post-conflict or contexts that are a bit dysfunctional, let's say, or on the way to full functionalization. And the work we do is supported by different types of donors, but especially for the educational part of our activity, it's Sweden, the country of Sweden, which has helped us really a lot, and I'd like to thank them here. The illustration that you see on the top, it's the brand we have developed for this series of booklets and games, which we have called EACEA. Don't bother remembering the name, just try to remind that this is the equivalent name for the English game called the tag game. And it's a traditional game that used to be played in Albania and everywhere else probably. And that consists in touching someone and leaving to that someone a message, and this person is frozen until someone else comes to unfreeze the person. So in a way it's a transmission game, let's say. And this plays very well in the context of our work with heritage, where we think that through this collection we are trying to revive that centuries-old mechanism of oral transmission of values and, basically the mechanisms that allowed cultural heritage to be saved and to be passed on from generation to generation. And we try to do that through games, and you can see here a very brief overview of 20 different items we have developed so far. And as I said to you earlier, our non-commitment to text is very, very sustained, and we like to work with items that are engaging, interactive for kids, and that put a focus on graphic quality. I saw a couple of illustrators back then with the tag illustrator here, so thanks to guys like you, actually, we do this kind of work, and I would like to thank all the illustrators all over the world. We do a lot of interpretation as well, and we talked a little bit about that in a very nice way, by the way. Thank you for having done that. And we also try to be as diverse as possible when it comes to choosing the subjects or the topics we are trying to kind of serve to our main public, which would be the kids aged from 6 to 11 years old. This being said, I just want to emphasize as well that we don't work with a specific museum. We don't work neither with a cultural heritage site or a specific school. But we work with all of them, as many as possible in the country of Albania. And you will know why in just a little bit. Well, if I'm to provide a bit more context to the work we do, well, I think there is a figure that came out from the Eurobarometer in 2018, which, if you remember, was the European Year of Cultural Heritage. And this figure, in our view, it's very important because it says that 90% of European citizens agree that Europe's cultural heritage should be taught in schools, as it tells us about our history and our culture. Well, reflecting a bit on this figure, I'm very much aware that in contexts like Western Europe, this is a fact. But from where I come from, this is not always given for granted. And adding to that, we need to say that we are working in contexts where formal education is a very heavy machinery, so it doesn't really, orient itself towards the new trends in a very, very quick way. In a time where there are needs coming from kids, from children, from families, from parents and educational staff that need to be fulfilled. So this is where we come in, and we try to develop non-formal tools, education tools and methodologies, so we can serve these needs, so we can provide them to the largest number possible of kids all over the territory, and of course with the main aim and the main goal for these tools and methodologies, and of course with our partners, to impact somehow the system, the curricula and mindset, impacting the mindset on the long run. And there are very different ways how we come up with these tools, and I'm sure you will all have those ways in your course too, and you will hear now why. The first way we started to do that was a bit out of activism. So a couple of guys and girls from the office, my age, I was born in 1984, where we never had items like this, booklets or games that were speaking about cultural heritage from the country or from the area where we are. So in a way it started out as a way to, fulfill our own kind of, let's say, past needs, but also realizing that the market wasn't providing anything of its sort yet in Albania at the time. So the first way how we started to do that was to get out of the drawers a finished project, which was a real restoration project that we were doing in Gernika. It lasted 4 years. It was quite a complicated restoration project that ended up inspiring a 3D paper, let's say, model that can be done by kids in schools or in other institutional settings in just 45 minutes. This is also a way for us as an organization. We are advocating a lot in attracting as many possible people and as early as possible towards the professions of preservation of cultural heritage, and mainly, restoration specialists, master craftspeople, and so on and so forth. So this is a way also to seduce a young audience and to explain to them that, hey, there is this also, that there are this type of activities that you should consider at this stage. Another way that we work is by fulfilling specific needs of let's say, cultural institutions. You see here images from a workshop that we have done together with the National Museum of Photography, sitting in Schäfter, north of Albania, which had these very specific needs at the time to valorize a very beautiful fund of photography of the late 19th century and beginning of 20th century, but who remained confined in the people that were specialists of the area, but not really in the communities that this museum was serving actually in Schäfter. So what we did was to take these beautiful pictures, images, and get people from high schools, artistic high schools, to sketch over them, and then do a compilation of these nice drawings that ended up in our desks, and together with graphic designers, we did a publication that now is a coloring book that is not just for children, but also for adults, and that is being used also in the museum, but also in the different schools around Albania, actually. And this is very, very interesting, and at the same time, it pushed us to think a bit about the working ways that we are kind of cultivating with this project. And that the question is, and this is where I need your help as well, maybe now or maybe later during the question, but how do you feel about, educational content that is served to a child, but which is in a way developed from the point of view of an adult all the time? So, is that fair? What do you think? Is that, yeah. So, can we frame, the world in our own view as adults, and then serve it to children? And in which context we can do that? Should we do that, while they are working at the house, in the house of parents, or while they are doing, their discussions in the classroom with teachers, which sometimes tend also to be overprotective. So that's also a kind of considerations that we are always thinking about when developing this kind of items. A third way to come up with new items for the collection is to identify and focus on underrepresented heritage objects or stories that have a potential to enable interesting discussion, especially about difficult subjects. We had a very, very good presentation earlier on about how to do that. But I took the example here of this is a spread taken out of a publication on the fustanella, which is a traditional dress for men, which was used until the beginning of 20th century in our part of the world, which has completely disappeared now, of course. You can only see it in museums, by the way. And then this provides, a perfect breeding ground for discussion on gender as a social construction. Dresses for men, interesting. Sometimes we have teachers stopping immediately that kind of discussion, and that's also part of the work and the experience. We can talk about very important concepts in our field of work, which is cultural loss, so uniformization of lifestyles. There's a sacrifice to that. And of course about discrimination, and we took this spread because it explained, different men wearing dresses coming from very different parts of the world and, struggling with a sort of discrimination. And this is where I need your help for a second time, because how far do you go when trying to engage with difficult subjects with kids? And I have the example for you right now. So you can see the illustration behind me. You can see the first kind of draft of the first spread that I showed. So now we have 4 people represented in the image, and the 4th person is Conchita, who I'm sure everyone knows. When we were making this publication, Conchita had just won the Eurosong, Eurovision contest song. And from the logic of the spread, it actually fits very perfectly. So it's a man wearing a dress and fighting against the type of discrimination. So we wanted Conchita to stay there, but at the end we couldn't, because the feedback we received from teachers, from parents, from other kids as well, was not conclusive, let's say. So how far do you go when you talk about these subjects with kids? And if you go far, where do you draw the line? How do you do that? So these are all questions that are very relevant to our work. And please share your experiences, if you want now or later on. I would be very interested in this. Yeah. And then, no matter what the origin of these new items comes from, they are all used to organize public activities. And that is also another specific need of the sector in Albania, where it's very difficult to get kids outside of classrooms because of all the responsibilities, because of the lack of means. I'm sure it is a bit the same everywhere, so the least we can do is to bring over these items in classroom and have teachers and us as, let's say, professionals of heritage speak and engage in a discussion. The best is when we take kids outside and to see those places for real, and sometimes it's very disheartening to see that, let's say, kids coming from villages nearby World Heritage towns. I mean, they don't have a clue about what these towns are, what are the, the objects or the buildings that are so meaningful to the whole humanity. So because they lack of access to do that. When we do that, we also try to accompany each item with lesson plans, very simple, guidelines for teachers and for educators or pedagogic staff in different institutions, so they can continue with other sessions based on the items, so that they can have a prolonged discussion about the topics that we are proposing. Here, very briefly, I wanted to mention another typology of games that we have developed, and this is called Don't Get Mad. It's a combination of a traditional board game played in Albania, especially during communism time, and combined with an imaginary itinerary of cities in Albania, historical cities, where we try to include important stories, important characters. There is a specific focus on women characters because they have done local history, and with that, the national history as well, but they are, well, not sometimes, but oftentimes underrepresented. We talk about dialects, about gastronomy, so this is a perfect way of combining the competition and also a bit of a discovery of the territory for the kids. This can be played in classes or in cultural institutions, but our preferred way of playing this is to print it in a giant way, 6 meter by 6 meter, place it in different squares or very close, as possible as we can, very close to municipalities or authorities that have a say, a decision-making power over cultural heritage matters. Because we want to show them that there is a lot of interest, there is a lot of energy, that people have interest. It's not only kids, it's their parents, it's their grandparents, there are tourists coming as well, so it's a good way of promoting heritage matters. And lastly, as a conclusion, I would say that, I said it before, I think working in museums or with heritage, we all have in our courts to reutilize and upcycle some of our past projects into new kind of initiatives that can be served in a bit of a different way. And it's good for us too, as professionals as well, sometimes to do that, because that allows you to take the space from the daily activities, get a balcony view, as they say, and really understand a bit better the work we are doing. Of course, it's very important to remain very open-minded towards new topic, and also to go, as it was said earlier, so pay attention not only to the 30% of the people that are coming to the museum, but maybe try to understand what the 70% of the people that are coming, what they would like to be tackling. And of course, be supportive of teachers, of people that are working, on a daily basis with cultural, let's say, heritage-based education. That's it from me, really. Thank you very much for your attention.
To try to start answering this question. So thank you very much, and now we're going to move to Andreas Schäfter from Gernika Gogoratuz. Andreas.
Now I'm in a mess. I'm the last speaker, so you're all tired. And I got lots of papers. I have PowerPoint, which I usually don't do. So you're advised it can be quite messy. I try. And I first have to take you to Gernika. Talking about community intervention, of course, that's such a big topic, and having only 10 or 12 minutes to talk about it is, of course, much too short. So maybe I can give you some key clues on the basis of what we are working when we are talking about community intervention in Gernika. So what is Gernika Gogoratuz? I first have to explain where I come from. If you hear a funny accent, it's my German accent, but I've been living for 35 years now in the Basque Country. So Gernika is located in the Basque Country, and Gernika Gogoratuz in Basque means recalling or remembering Gernika. The center was created by the Basque Parliament in 1987, so that means that we have our 35th anniversary this year. I've been working there for about 15 years, and I've done quite a bit of community intervention programs. that had to do with parenting also, so I like the topic, but that will not be the topic so much today. It's supported by the Gernika Foundation, and we do a whole lot of varieties of different kind of activities. We are a site of conscience, but we don't have like we're not a museum, so actually you're obliged to go out and do the things outside, right? I'm sorry, I told you. Maybe all of you, or maybe not, maybe the younger ones not so much, know this mural by Pablo Picasso called Gernika. That's why Gernika became so famous, not only because of the painting, because the painting has its reason, and that has to do with the legacies we are dealing with, which on one hand is the bombing of Gernika in 1937, in the context of the Spanish Civil War. Gernika was bombed by the German Counter Legion and by the Aviazione Militare Italiana. So this brings you right back to the connection, or right to the connection between Italy and Gernika and the Spanish Civil War, which was not civil at all. It was a very international war with lots of interventions, and if we think about Ukraine today or Syria, we can find parallels. We also deal with decades of politically motivated violence, which had to do with the outcome of the Civil War, which was the dictatorship by Franco. And after that, we had a political conflict with the armed struggle and terrorism during decades, carried out basically by ETA, but also by some police forces with repression, torture. So we had all kinds of victims in this conflict. Our mission, basically, it's in our constitution, sort of. It's in our record, is to work for emancipated peace in the West Country and throughout the world. That's nothing great. It gives us a whole workload, and trying to run out of work, but we sadly there's more and more work apparently that we will have to do, and it gives us, of course, a mandate to engage for profound change in society. So what do we do? As I said, we do all kinds of different activities, which we do this kind of conventions as we are here. We do cultural activities in the community related, of course, to peace and to topics related to peace. So one of the main activities throughout the year are like the convention, the yearly convention on peace and culture. This year we also did, like, we started to do a convention, a yearly convention on peace economy, because we think in order to reach really profound peace, or emancipated peace, we need to change our economic system. We need a different economy, which we there call peace economy. And the last but not the least, and it brings you to the topic actually, because this is a program we did with CEAR. CEAR is the Spanish association that sort of takes care of the refugees. And it's a community activity we did at the adult school, when we talk about different places we can go to in order to work, for the values or for the topics we're working for. The adult schools are a pretty good place because you have a really big variety of different people there. It was called, and it brings us also to the topic of the intervention program. We are talking a little bit more about it. It's the two lives of the exile, which back then was called exile after the Civil War, especially, or even before. And today, so the life between the subtitle is like, what have two women, or what can two women share who come from different places, totally different places, come from different times, different generations, but have lived in some way through the experience of exile. What can they share? So that was the topic for that kind of activity. So when we talk about community intervention, what is it based on? So basically we want to involve other agents, other social agents, but not only, also sometimes institutions, on what we call to work for a culture of peace. And we want to reach out to people where the people are, not call in the people. Usually when we have activities, and you have this, of course, this as museums, you usually call people in to have the activity in the museum. But there was also talk before that maybe it would be good to go out to spread, so to reach out to people in the community. And of course we want to have an impact, but without imposing. So we want to have an impact in society. We want to, but without imposing from a point of view, viewpoint where we sort of tell the people how they shall be or should be. So in this way we try to, we have some main objectives. We want to raise conscience and knowledge between what is the relationship between society and ourselves as individuals, the subject of society. Because this relationship is already in some way established when we are born, because we are usually born into a society where there are concrete ways of relationships, where there are concrete ways of living, where the society precedes ourselves. So actually we're not born into neutral ground, right? So we need to know more about this historical and social and cultural background, because we are social, historical beings, because there's no such thing as a neutral human out there. We could define, we always define the human, becoming a human in a concrete social and political, economic context. And that brings us to this kind of social construction of our mindsets and beliefs, which go very deep. They're so deeply rooted that we're not conscious about it. Just think about gender roles, for instance. You know, how they were created and how they are promoted, and how we still relate. Also, things have changed in many ways to these main hegemonic gender roles. And there's another thing very important, and that's the perception of otherness, how we perceive otherness. Because in our society, in our competitive society, we have a hard time actually to perceive the other as a potential collaborator, a person that we can learn from. We usually tend, and that's on the other hand normal, that we have some kind of resistance because the other puts us in the mirror. So we actually find out there is something like the otherness, and that sort of brings uncertainty, right, about your own beliefs. So that's where sometimes the fear comes from, and not so much that the otherness because he's or she's different or so different is the problem, because we lose the ground of our own basis because we are confronted with otherness, which brings some doubts and uncertainty about our own beliefs. We also want to develop critical thinking in the face of reality, self-awareness and self-reflection. It's some very basic knowledge on the functioning of our society. The more we know, the better. And we need to construct a we identity that transcends the local community or like nationalism, We need to create a we identity as humankind. So, talking about a concrete example of community intervention was on war migration, called with the project Gernika. My guide spirit, which means invest out of the shadow. When the Basques say 11, Micah means 11, they mean a whole lot. So hundreds of sparks, where we try to give voice to the unheard in some way, or try to raise or speak about topics in different ways that people are used to. We did it in a transgenerational setting, in a residence with 5th, 6th grade primary students, and with elder in the residence. So what's the use in bringing elder and young people together? Because we find out that today there's a lack of the presence of elder people usually in the family. The family is down to a very nuclear family, or sometimes there are only 2 persons, like single parents families, or before we had the painting before, that family was usually much bigger, the presence of older people. So there's actually a lack of sort of natural transmission of knowledge in general about society, not only knowledge in terms of facts, but also in terms of emotion and the way people have lived through a certain period. So that way we can actually recuperate. If we bring them into contact with the young, we can recuperate their social function to a certain extent, of course. And on the other hand, we may raise more respect for the elder, because in today's society, the elder sort of refined to the residences, right? So they're not present. There's no social function for them. They're sort of recluded in the residence. I'm generalizing. In terms of the specific goals of this activity, we wanted to work on the historical memory. We wanted to make the people understand that the future is in the past in some way. It's the way how we look at the past. The past usually they use the rowing image. When we move to the future, you look to the past and you're moving on to the future, which is a kind of an image how we actually should maybe go to the future. We want to reflect on different migration processes and developing empathy on immigrants, because usually the local problem is not so much about migration in general, because there's no too much conscience about migration processes, but about immigrants. That's why we need to challenge this social imaginary created in our societies about migration. Here you have some pictures where you see that some of the elder at the residence and some of the classes we worked on. And usually we start out, of course, with Gernika, because we still have people who have lived through the bombing or through the period after the bombing. And within the classes, usually there are students who also have this kind of experience through somebody of the family. So there's interaction there. And the young can ask the old, and the old can tell. And since at a residence you also have very different people, usually have different experiences and very different, let's say, ideological viewpoints also. Of course, after the war, they came, or even before the war, I don't know if you know about it, but around 40,000 children were sent out to other countries from the Basque country, because they had to. The parents wanted them to be out there when the Franco troops moved into the Basque country. But we also had, after the war, kind of industrialization. We also had an emigration of Basque people to America, and through the industrialization process there was also a migration, an immigration process from other parts of Spain. So you usually have these all different kinds of migration processes in the local community, and everybody has some kind of experience, because the last let's say movement of migration is the more recent one, like from 2000 on. And here you have also other types of forced migration through war or through working conditions. Up there, the boat you see there, the ship there, is a rescue ship on the Mediterranean. So, and the case was that this class at that school, they had already worked on, they had them present in their class before, so that's be related to that. Of course, the effect of that kind of intervention, maybe it's too much to call it intervention, is limited, but it was like 4 times we did it with different classes in the residence, so actually there was some kind of continuity there. And to do it with groups also favors that the impact can be much bigger, because after that they talk with each other. And of course we introduced the future and the uncertainty about the future and who might be the next refugee or the next migrant. And that's a total different story when you make them think, or when they raise, or actually the question when you talk about the future, that they might be actually forced to move somewhere because of climate change. So that brings a very different kind of perspective on the whole migration process, of course. This one is, since we are at Gernika, we have a site of conscience there, which is called the Peace Museum. It's a different institution, we cooperate a lot, and what you see here is Kids Gernika initiative. I don't know if you heard about it, but if you Google it, you can find out about it. It's one way to reimagine Gernika and to work also with the classes. It's one way of community there. And at the museum, they also do this kind of Sundays at the museum, where they do different types of activities in order to work with the young and the family. Yeah, I know. I just want to raise at least one question at the end. If you look at this picture, I want to draw your attention on this picture here. This is a family activity at the museum. And, well, just try to maybe keep it in mind, but I would like to raise the question. Usually, when we try to work with a group of persons, I can't really see, and I have discussed it with the educator there at the Peace Museum. You don't see a group there, right? You have to split that, and actually they started this action with the Sunday at the museum. That they had a specific activity for the young, and they thought that the adults, the parents, meantime would go through the permanent exhibition, right, at the Peace Museum. But that didn't work. The people left their children there and maybe took off, so they started to say, well, that can't be also, so we need to involve the parents actually. And they involve the parents, but then the children don't interact so much among themselves and are more with their parents, sort of. They stay with their parents, and it becomes harder in some way for the educators to introduce group dynamics. So we should think about these kind of things in maybe, in order to what extent and what kind of dynamics we want with parents, children, to what age, what context, and so on. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andreas. As you see, there's still a lot to say. So, if you have, Andreas is here for the next 2 days, or if you have any question, if you want to know more, he will be more than happy to discuss with you more about their work. The same for Mirian. Thank you, Andreas, for ending on this very important question, and I think it's also one of the challenges that most museums and cultural institutions are facing. It's not only about engaging children, but how you engage the family as a unit and you create discussion and dialogue within the family. We have a few minutes for question and answers. We are sorry because we had to skip the question and answer session after the previous session. So if you have also any question for Francesca, Maeve, and Vanessa, please feel free. And Andreas and Miriam. So we will circulate a mic, and we are open now for your question or comments or congratulations for our speakers.
Thank you. I actually do have a question for Maeve from Derry Museum. I think she's okay. Here you are. No, I was just very impressed by the very difficult heritage you have to deal with, and I was just wondering, coming from a country that has a very national museum tradition rather than more private museum, how much do you think your action is helped, let's say, by the fact that you're a private trust, and how much are you able to influence the national narrative regarding Bloody Sunday with your work, despite, you're a private institution. I think it probably gives you much freedom, probably. I don't know if the question is clear. Thank you.
And thank you for your question. That's an important one. I think that what we would view ourselves as an independent museum. And I can see that has its strengths. But I also believe that you need to be able to influence, if you like, the kind of government departmental, statutory authorities, tourism authorities across the island. So we need to be at those tables. I think it has been difficult for many years because we are telling a story that is different from the traditional narrative that was presented, which was very tribal and religious, and there is another part. So that was difficult, but I think we've hugely influenced that agenda. And I think we've done that when we look at the whole issue of the public inquiry, which completely, I suppose from the family's perspective, said what they believed anyway, and probably the wider people of the city believed. But it very clearly validated and vindicated the story that many, many people believed for years. And as a result of that, that public apology, whilst there are many people who would say, well, that wasn't everything, for me it was significant in terms of conflict transformation across our islands, even between Ireland and England. And what it did was give us a platform to use to bring other people into the conversation. So I think it has changed the narrative, but I do think we have much more to do. And I think there are elements in society who maybe think it's better that we don't hear that story. But what has happened is people have voted with their feet. So people come to the city in their tens and tens and tens of thousands, and they visit the museum. The museum was in 2019, pre-COVID, the highest paying and visitor attraction in the city. So it's clearly a reason why people want to understand the civil rights campaign, the protest, the trauma, the public inquiry, and how that relates to the peace process. So hopefully that's answered, but thank you for your question. Thank you.
I think it was a really intense day. How do you feel? Full of things. Actually, it's not a question, but it's a consideration about what we heard today. Because I was wondering now about the experience of Merima, this kind of, the first at the museum, the children was discovering all the objects, and then at home with the parents. And now I was thinking that this is a beautiful way also for parents, especially in this kind of museum where parents are involved because it's part of their story, to be helped in order to explain to their children how is my relation with my story, with the story of this country, with the story of this, because I mean, normally when in Italy, when we talk about memory or museum of memory, we talked about an ancient or old thing, no? But it's not the same everywhere. So probably museum can also help people to talk, parents to talk with their children, to live this connection, this interaction in a new way, in an emotional way. So I think it's very interesting, this part. Yeah, just. Thank you.
Sorry. Yeah. No, I just would like to add to what you are saying, because I think it's important. And I think it's also important to mention that in the case of World Childhood Museum, it's about parents sharing about their experience of the war, and in the supporting them to engage in a difficult discussion that they never had because it's so traumatic. But I think it's also an opportunity for not only to teach the children, but also to ask the children what about their experience, what about their perception. Because, for example, you mentioned about Italian museums that are more looking at the past. But if we think about you, Giovanna, I mean the museum, it's about addressing migration, which is an old topic for Italy, because you have been migrating for in the past, but it's also a way to address migration today. And I think that children have a lot to learn, but they also have a lot to teach and to tell their parents. And I think it's very important, especially when it comes to migration. I mean, children experience migration a lot. At school, they are sharing with a lot of children of migrants people, and I think what they have to learn to teach us about migration is very important. And I think their perception, and I think most of the time they are much more tolerant than us, and they experience migration much more than their parents. So I think it's both ways, and it's not only teaching the children, it's about listening to the children and giving them the opportunity to also share their experience and their perception. I think it's an important aspect as well.
Okay. So, we are at the end of this day. I want to thank everyone, all of you staying here today, participating. I want to thank Justine and Mirian and Andreas and all the panelists, the speakers of today.
I want to thank the technician, the interpreter, the Galata Museum staff. I want to thank all Lilliput team and all the museum. Did I miss somebody?
Dinner. You're right. Straight thing.
Okay, now if the ones who want to have a visit in the museum, you can visit the museum freely. You have the possibility to have a discount on the ticket. So if you show your pass to the ticket office, as the museum is very big, we and with Giovanna, we suggest to visit the 3rd floor, which is the one that Giovanna was talking about migration. The others are free. I want to thank you for coming and have a good trip back to your museums. I hope that you will bring all the things in your everyday work. For the ones who are staying for the 3 days of the workshops, we will meet at dinner at 8 p.m. in the restaurant you have in your logistic instruction. Did I say everything? Yes, do you want to say something?
No, thank you everyone. I mean, it was a very interesting day. It was so important to hear about all your experience, and I mean, looking forward to continue the discussion over the next 2 days.
Yeah.
And thank you to the Lilliput team for the very good organization of today's meeting, and to the interpreters.
Thank you. For us, it's just the beginning, so we will meet again.